Hi, it's Colin Cowherd. I started The Volume to bring you some of the most authentic voices in sports. While you're here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks.
I was so fascinated with the way that Dallas came back to win that game because they were getting a boatload of stops. Golden State could not score. I saw a stat that one of the Warriors beat writers put out there that the Warriors did not make a field goal from the 9-something minute mark to about the 2-minute mark in the fourth quarter. And so what I was fascinated by is the way that Dallas was getting stops. Because they had a lineup out there with Luka Doncic, who's he's a big defender who can gamble and play passing lanes a little bit. He's a decent positional defender, but he's certainly not a good defender. He's just passable. You know, Dinwiddie's an okay defensive player. Jalen Brunson is okay. They went with Luka, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Jalen Brunson, so they're three best shot creators. Reggie Bullock, who is lock and trailing Steph all over the court and just denying him the basketball, but he's an only okay defensive player. He's not a great defensive player. He had a good defensive season last year with the Knicks, but over the course of his career, he's been more or less just an okay defensive player. And then Dorian Finney-Smith, who's a really good defensive wing. So they had Dorian Finney-Smith, a wing playing center, a two-guard chasing Steph around, and then three more two-guards on the floor, and completely and utterly shut down the Golden State Warriors. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think it's an example of the direction that the game of basketball is going in, something I've been talking about nonstop, and something that I think is so important. And the teams that embrace this first are going to be the teams that win. And the teams that cling to the old style of basketball are going to be the ones that look like the Lakers. So when you have that group and you switch everything, you shut down all of Golden State's actions. All of their pin downs and flares and split cuts and Steph flying off of screens. None of that works when you're switching everything. So then it becomes who can create a shot. And you got Andrew Wiggins, who loves to take and settle for 18 to 20 foot pull-up jump shots that he's only going to make, 38% of the time or whatever it is. And then you've got Steph, who, when they really are keying in on him at this phase in his career, he's going to struggle to get shots off. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But for the most part, it's a lot of guys on the Warriors that aren't great at creating their own shot. Even Jordan Poole is really struggling against Dorian Finney-Smith's length. So at the end of the day, the Warriors, their high-powered offense, their motion offense with all this movement and cutting and screening was utterly shut down by a team that just switched everything. And again, so many coaches get caught up in, I'm giving up a size mismatch. This guy can shoot a jump hook over Jalen Brunson in the post. Or this guy can get an offensive rebound against Spencer Dinwiddie. Yeah, you're right. They can. You're going to give up some things. Every defensive scheme is an example of giving and taking. Here's the thing that I'm going to take away from you. And here's the thing that I'm giving to you as part of the process of taking that other thing away. And Dallas gave up size mismatches all over the floor. Dallas gave up athleticism matchups all over the floor. And it just didn't matter because they switched everything. And then on the other end of the floor, with those three high-level dribble drive guys, and Spencer Dinwiddie, Jalen Brunson, and Luka Doncic, they're meanwhile getting fantastic stuff against a great Warriors defense that has tons of length and athleticism, that has great perimeter defenders who slide their feet and keep guys in front, and it's just not enough. Because on the other end, they're just picking their spots. Who has the best matchup? Spencer Dinwiddie was getting good stuff at the end of the game. That Luka was able to give the ball up because Spencer Dinwiddie was able to create his own shot and was able to create shots for his teammates. That's the advantage of that style of basketball. That is 5-out basketball. That is switch everything basketball. That is modern basketball, and that is what works now. And for whatever reason, there is nobody in the Laker front office that has watched enough hoops over the course of the last 5 years to understand that, because they've done everything in their power to alienate that sort of thing and lean into it. When everything was hitting the fan in the third quarter today, guess where Frank Vogel went? DeAndre Jordan, who at one point decided he was point DJ and dribbled the ball up the floor and threw it 30 feet over someone's head into the stands. It went about exactly as you would expect for a non-NBA player trying to play in an NBA basketball game. But at the end of the day, I thought it was super fascinating to see these teams like Dallas, and there's so many other teams like this around the league, that are succeeding playing a modern style of basketball. And it doesn't have to be, everyone told me all season long, the Lakers don't have defensive personnel. The Lakers don't have guys that can keep people in front. And there's a lot of truth to that. But they certainly weren't going to succeed playing old-fashioned basketball. If Dallas can get those guys to guard, the Lakers should have been able to get any of these guys to guard, and they just haven't been able to. Last thing I wanted to hit on the Warriors was Steph's shooting slump. So for this entire season, he's shooting 37.6% from three. But he's certainly not trending in the right direction because in his last 8 games, he's shooting 34.2% from three. Before the Draymond injury, the Warriors were 28-6, and since the Draymond injury, they're 15-12. So obviously Draymond plays a part in this. He brings a lot on the defensive end, but also for Steph's shot quality. He's really good at setting screens and rescreening and watching Steph off the ball and hunting him in the spots that he likes to be. They have a great chemistry with each other. So shot quality is part of that. But the other part of it that's really fascinating to me, because I don't think this is a slump anymore. We are now bordering on, this is a half of a season where Steph has not been able to shoot the three nearly as well as he has used to. Like massive decline, like 10% down from what he was shooting over the same stretch of games last year. That's how bad it's been. And what's really fascinating to me is the way that a guy like Steph Curry would age. Because you watch a guy like LeBron, or you watch a guy like Chris Paul, you watch these older vets that are good with body positioning and pinning guys and using their strength and angles to get their shots off. LeBron is way less athletic than he used to be when he was younger, but he's still so effective getting to the rim and finishing because he just does it with his strength and with savvy and positioning and sealing. And it's almost like a below the rim version of himself. But with Steph, because he is a jump shooter, because the lion's share of what he generates as a scorer is as a jump shooter, that minuscule decline can be the difference between a great look and only an okay look. When Steph was at his peak physically, he could have an inch of space, and that was enough for him. But maybe he needs 5 inches of space now as he's slowed down a little bit. And that difference can be the difference between shooting 44% on 13 threes a game and shooting 34% on 13 threes a game. So it remains to be seen because he looks mostly the same, right? Like he doesn't look slow out there. But again, a minuscule decline for a guy like Steph could be the difference between him being a great shooter and an amazing greatest shooter of all time and just a great shooter. That's the type of decline that you might see there. And it remains to be seen. Like I said, this could either be a long drawn-out slump, and we'll see him bust out of this. I said this on the favorites earlier this week. Steph is a bona fide MVP candidate, in my opinion, because if he shoots really well for a month, if he has 1 month where he shoots 48% from three on like 15 attempts, then all of a sudden his percentages round out. He finishes around 40% for the season. That's an MVP candidate. Because if they end up high enough in the standings, that's a very, traditional type of MVP candidate. So I'm not trying to, sign his obituary, so to speak. I'm just saying that this is now a very, very, very long, drawn-out slump, and it very easily could be the sign of a decline. Really quick hitters here. I wanted to touch on just how dominant the Sixers have been. It's only been 2 games, but I have some crazy stats for you guys. So James Harden and Joel Embiid have played 53 minutes together. In those 53 minutes, the Sixers are plus 46. Think about how crazy that is. That's a plus 43.1 net rating in those minutes. 134.5 offensive rating. That's outrageously good. 91.4 defensive rating. That's outrageously good. That is about as resounding a dominant beginning to this era that you could have possibly scripted. What I thought was really interesting is the difference in the way that James Harden is playing with Embiid and without Embiid. So when Embiid's on the floor, James Harden is only attempting 9.5 shots per 36 minutes. But in those same minutes, he's averaging 15.7 assists per 36 minutes. So when Joel Embiid's on the floor, he's going full playmaker. But when Joel Embiid's off the floor, his field goal attempts go up to 20.1 per 36, and his assists drop all the way down to 8.4 per 36. So he's completely changing his approach when Embiid's off the floor to your vintage James Harden, I'm trying to score the basketball. The reason why I think that's interesting is I think that one of the ways that these two teams, the way that Minnesota guarded him and the way that the Knicks have guarded him, way too much like trapping and sending two bodies at Harden while he's running those screen and rolls with Embiid, when James doesn't want to shoot when he's with Embiid. James wants to facilitate when he's with Embiid. And my thing is, like, with how dominant Embiid is playing right now, very clearly one of the best players in the league, probably going to win MVP, why would you play into his strengths? You should want James Harden to beat you, not Embiid. So my thing is, I would like to see some of these teams with Embiid on the floor play James Harden straight up a little bit more and try to get the Sixers out of rhythm and start to try to get James to gun a little bit and maybe get that dynamic to switch away. Because the amount of free throws that Joel Embiid is getting with James Harden is insane. And a big part of that is him catching the ball in that short roll unguarded because his man is trapping James Harden 30 feet from the basket when James Harden doesn't want to shoot. So that's going to be the interesting dynamic to watch there. One last note on the Sixers. While Joel Embiid and James Harden are on the floor, other Sixers players are shooting 42.4% from three. That's how open and high quality the looks are that the other role players are getting playing alongside Joel Embiid and James Harden. That's scary, especially with how good those role players are at doing the defensive job on the other end of the floor. Last really quick note before we get out of here, the Phoenix Suns lost their second consecutive game without Chris Paul. Their offensive rating this season drops from 115.9 with Chris Paul on the floor to 106.3 without him. Translation, with Chris Paul on the floor, they're one of the best offenses in the league. With Chris Paul off the floor, they're one of the worst offenses in the league. That's basically the difference that we're talking about. And this goes back to what I said when I was talking about the Suns last week. This Chris Paul injury is fine. They bought so much leeway that they can drop a couple of home games like this, and it's not a big deal. They're going to end up the number one overall seed pretty much no matter what. So everything's fine. But if Chris Paul, for whatever reason, can't play in the playoffs, whether it's from this injury or him being a shell of himself because he's not in shape when he gets back or he's not in rhythm, or if he, for whatever reason, suffers some other kind of injury and he can't play in the playoffs, this suddenly becomes a very beatable basketball team. That's the fragility of the NBA. That's just how this works. When guys get hurt, you lose. I mean, you don't have to look any further than the Lakers to understand that. But I'm just saying, even for a team as talented as the Suns, they are not immune to that either. And they're going to need all their guys to be healthy to have a real chance to win.